All right, some big news today. In addition to the Supreme Court having oral arguments in a case that could have a major impact on the 2024 presidential election, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments decide former President Trump's eligibility to hold office again based upon Colorado's decision to prohibit the former president from placement on the state's Republican primary ballot. Looked like it leaned toward common sense that the state doesn't have the ability to do that. Another issue, and Coach Tuberville mentioned that on the way out, was the Special Counsel Robert Hur releasing his report, 388 pages, saying that the president, that is President Biden, willfully retained and disclosed classified materials following his vice presidency, but he recommended that the commander-in-chief not face charges. And this is a quote that a lot of people are picking up on from the report, said he would likely, and this is a quote, he would likely present himself to a jury as he did during our interview of him as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, end quote. Joining me now to talk about this, Jeff Clark, former U.S. Assistant Attorney General and now Senior Fellow and Director of Litigation at the Center for Renewing America. Jeff, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be here, Tony. And it's a historic day, I think, both with this Robert Hur report you just covered and with the Supreme Court oral argument in the Colorado case.
Well, I think the one that is probably the easiest to handle based upon the oral arguments might be the Supreme Court. It looked like it tilted in favor of former President Donald Trump and not Colorado.
I think that's right. And look, I think it was a complete smackdown. It's like, WWE Smackdown Day. I've rarely seen an argument of such high profile that was, according to the mainstream media, given so much hype, so much pomp of, this could be the end of Trump, even though there were some commentators on the left recognizing that it was a long shot. They really pumped this up with Judge Ludig and others. But I listened to the whole oral argument. My listen of it is that this is going to be at least an 8-1 decision, and it might be unanimous. I think the question mark for me is full question mark on Justice Sotomayor. Will she be convinced to go along with the majority on one or more rationales? And there's probably a half question mark I have on Justice Jackson, but she seemed to be very attracted to the theory that the president was deliberately not listed in the list of offices that you're disqualified from under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, because that list starts with senator, then goes to representative. It's a hierarchically arranged list, and the president's not there, the vice president's not there. And she came back to that several times. So I think this is disastrous for those who were predicting that President Trump was going to be held guilty of an insurrection. And I think the Supreme Court is going to make relatively short work of this, Tony.
Jeff, all of these things that go back to Donald Trump's presidency, the congressional investigations, the indictments, or the impeachments, it's kind of like it's this echo chamber that the left has. They get themselves all worked up into a froth, and when you actually look at the facts, it doesn't work out in their favor.
Right. Oftentimes that's true, but I think that their game is larger than just the game of whether they win a particular case. President Trump really has to win all of these things. He should win all of them, right. But they hope that, some ball falls through the cracks, and they love the drumbeat of one case after another. And they're also forcing all of these cases to go to the Supreme Court, and they're eating up his capital, right? At some point, litigants get so noisy, the court kind of says, can't we just kind of be done with this?
But I think the American people also see that they're starting to see what's going on here. None of this stuff is sticking. Yes, it is wearing him down. I'm amazed he's still standing. But I think they're losing credibility with each one of these. And at least that's my sense, that Americans are starting to see through this.
I think you're right. And I had said very early on when they started this whole lawfare campaign that the optimal number of cases to bring against President Trump, if you're an evil-minded person on the other side, who wants to do this, whether the cases are meritorious or not, and I think all the cases are not meritorious, is you bring two. Why two? Because if you bring one, maybe one fails, you want to have a backup. But if you bring 3, 4, 5, you bring civil cases, you bring cases from cities, you bring, cases under RICO, you bring cases under national security, the Espionage Act, et cetera, it starts to look like there's just one person they want to take out because they don't want to run against him and because they're in fear of what happens if he returns to the presidency. And I do think the American people see through that, Tony.
Speaking of things they see through, Jeff, I think they're beginning to see through our system of justice, and they're seeing a double standard. I mean, speak to this elderly man with a poor memory.
Tony, obviously I have not gotten in the short time that this news is broken through the whole report that Robert Hur put out. But, I think this is predictable. Everybody knew that this is where Biden and Garland had lined things up to go. And, I think Hur was essentially kind of working within his implicit marching orders. And so he's come to the conclusion he's not going to prosecute him. It seems like he's doing that under what I'll call the senility exception, that, President Biden has a poor memory at this point. He didn't always have a poor memory. He wasn't always old. And as Biden himself was noting, this goes back to the time, not just that he was vice president for Obama, but to the time where he was a senator. So did he have a poor memory during all of those periods of time? I don't think so. So, maybe if he testified, he would present himself as a sympathetic elderly man to a jury. But the argument of prosecutors, if they were being energetic, would be, but you didn't have those conditions at this time. And, you knew when you took these documents from Afghanistan and other national security documents that this was a serious matter, right? If you're applying the same standards to him as you are to President Trump, even if you imagine that he was equal to a president, but he wasn't at any time equal to a president. He's actually more poorly situated than Trump, right? Because he was only a vice president, and vice presidents don't have declassification authority unless the president gives it to him. And then he was a senator where he had zero declassification authority. So this, it's just a whitewash, Tony. It's really another travesty.
But if it is true, it should have some bearing on his reelection as president.